how people flip this room and it
promoted the adoption of sustainable practices in California.
Getting into the wines, I think that the one conversation that I have with growers and producers throughout their process in sustainable, organic, biodynamic, whatever vineyard I am in, everyone more than ever is talking about how they can do less, how they can get better fruit quality through soil preservation and building our soils. So really working with cover crops. I think the more time, and this comes from sustainability certifications and from organic certifications, that growers and makers spend more time together in the vineyards. They're out there much more frequently on a day-to-day basis, observing the changes year to year. And this can't help but be taken on as a winemaker into the cellar and become part of the conversation about doing better for the future, doing better for those creeks and rivers that flow off of your vineyard, and really water preservation, helping to build cover crop, soil moisture, no tilling or reducing tillage really results in the vine having more access to nutrients, more root structure, deeper root structure, and that vine being able to have a greater conversation with that piece of land, whether you're grown on sandy soils, volcanic soils, granitic soils. It's really about those roots and those micronutrients having the true conversation with the soil and their access to being able to uptake all of those nutrients so that we don't need to add anything in the winery. That's where quality wine comes from, and that's where true terroir comes from, and that's what we have in living wines. And I don't know about you guys, but I think living wines just taste better. They have energy, they have life. And so coming into some of our conversations about continuing this experience, it really flows from the vineyard, from what we do day to day, talking to our growers, to bringing that into the cellar. And all of these producers are really, really engaged in both their vineyards and their cellar. Grgich, historic Grgich Hills, Mike Grgich was really instrumental in putting California on the map in terms of the Judgment of Paris tasting. 50 years ago next year, his 1973 Chateau Montelena Chardonnay bested the French. That got us noticed. And Mike Grgich was raised in a farming agricultural village in Croatia. He worked regenerative farming practices. Do you think that they had systemic herbicides and fungicides available to them in their village in Croatia? He was adept at bringing this conversation 50 years ago to California. And I don't know who was in the room yesterday, but Dry Creek Valley Vineyards 30 years ago started the template for sustainable wine growing in California, really starting that organization. So this is historic, and it's been done for years, and a lot of it has been done from people working and growing on the land naturally and then moving that knowledge. A lot of the vineyards have been farmed and founded by immigrants who brought their knowledge of holistic farming practices with them, and that's where we are today in California, and really along the entire West Coast. We're all working for a more sustainable future. So let's get into these delicious wines. So the Grgich Hills Sauvignon Blanc, I really love this wine because it is a harken back to Mike's original homeland. This is a skin fermented Sauvignon Blanc. It is farmed in mostly American Canyon, but Grgich Hills has vineyards all over Napa Valley. They farm, I think it's 500 acres entirely across Napa Valley, from Carneros to American Canyon to Rutherford, where the winery is situated as well. And many of those vineyards are all organic certified at a minimum, and working with also now regenerative farming practices.
That's right. And Becky, you may know if they actually have achieved their regenerative certification. I know that they're on the way working towards a regenerative certification. I also know that they were just, they're going to be featured in a documentary that's going to be coming out highlighting regenerative winemaking, and I don't know the name of it, but I will look up on my phone and try to tell you because I hear it's going to be great.
Yeah, so working really regeneratively in the vineyard, that means bringing animals into the vineyard, building those cover crops, building natural fertilization in the soil, helping to retain water, less reliance on irrigation, no tillage. And Sauvignon Blanc is one of those varieties that is actually really perfect for that. It is a high yielding variety that really loves sunshine and also retains its acidity as well. So the vigor in vineyards can really be seen in Sauvignon Blanc as well, and the health of a vineyard in Sauvignon Blanc as well. The brightness of the fruit here is really restrained because of the way that they bring in the fruit, destem, whole cluster press, and then ferment it on its skins in stainless steel tanks for about 2 weeks, really bringing a restrained fruit profile and really bringing in a little bit more phenolics into that palate as well. So no need for oak here. You're still seeing a cool, temperature-controlled stainless steel fermentation, preserving the brightness of the fruit, but really bringing through that textural component through a very traditional style of winemaking in Croatia that is now being celebrated across the US as well.
Hello. I'll also add that Grgich is here at the fair, just down on the other side of this aisle. So if you'd like to taste more of their wines, they have several to share.
Yeah, and I would recommend it as well because you do get to have a more of a terroir and soil conversation as you taste through their wines, because this is mostly from American Canyon Vineyard, which is quite sandy soils. There is some Rutherford fruit in here, which is you start to come up onto the alluvial fens and onto the benchlands, but a little more texture coming through from the use of different soils, silkiness on the palate from those sandy soils as well. Shannon Ridge, this Chardonnay is situated in Lake County. Shannon Ridge, this wine is one of really one of the pioneers up in Lake County who started organic farming and also regenerative ranch farming basically about 30 years ago. This is one of their oldest vineyards. It's high elevation fruit, so it's 2,300 feet, so 800 meters elevation, really sitting high above Lake County. So the lake is actually the lowest elevation portion in this area. So these soils are volcanic and very exposed, so they get a lot of wind. It's a late ripening site, but it also sits above the fog line, so you're not getting the impact of fog here. You get the influence of elevation, of high UV, and also wind influence to preserve those acidities. This vineyard is farmed regeneratively as well, and it is certified organic. And they do run sheep in this vineyard as well.
That they started an integrated business model of raising sheep also alongside the wine business. So, and they mesh together so nicely. A lot of Californians these days are actually having shepherds and shepherdesses bring flocks onto the vineyard. They don't own their own animals, but Clay and Auntie Shannon up in Lake County have a thriving sheep-based rearing business, and so all of their sheep graze in the vineyard throughout the year.
And you can see in this wine that freshness of fruit that we spoke about coming from high elevations and that high UV content as well, but also having the freshness of the wind providing that very crisp but ripe fruit profile in the wines. This is a portion of both stainless and larger oak vessel fermentation, and about 30% new oak present as well, and a portion of blocked mallow. So you're getting really fresh, almost that custard apple coming through with the citrus profile and that fresh grapefruit pepperiness as well. I think what I really find attractive in these wines as well is that just that energy and lift. It has such aromatics, but there's a restrained brightness and acidity to the wines as well, that come also from core yields as well. If you're not pumping up the vines on, fertilizer and other systemic inputs, then the vines really do have to work to get that naturally from the soils. And so the vines moderate and balance themselves very naturally, which also means that you ultimately need to be doing less in the vineyards. I think Clay, Shannon, mentioned that when they fully transitioned, it was really noticeable how much less tractor compaction and time that they had to spend in the vineyard managing the vines, because the vines managed themselves. Moving into wine 3, so we are in beautiful Lodi in old vine Zinfandel land. And I know Lodi doesn't get talked about quite as much as Napa Valley and Sonoma, but it is such a beautiful region of old vines. And I think what we're starting to see from a lot of the younger winemakers in the area as well, because of the dry farming, the dry climate here, the old vines, there is a lot of diversity in these vineyards, and what they're finding, the younger generation is also driving the sustainable movement and the sustainable movement in the cellar as well, so that they don't need to be adding anything in the cellar. And that means working with mixed vineyards, which is a lot of what is in Lodi as well, especially for old vines. And they don't mind working vineyards where they're not going to have incredibly high yields. This isn't agro farming. These are very old vines and very nurtured old vineyards and balanced old vineyards. So this Centennial Zinfandel comes from vines that have really, they're 100 years old. They are very low yielding, and I think that you taste this in the wine. They moderate themselves. This Zinfandel, despite being from one of the warmest AVAs in California, has so much freshness of fruit. There's a restraint to that fruit profile as well, and a spice level that I just think comes from that really lovely exposure of old vines. They have a very natural conversation with the soil and with their place. And so these old vines, low yielding, concentrated fruit, but very, very balanced. And what we can learn from old vines and what they teach us as well is something that's really worth observing and paying attention to. From a clonal perspective as well, I think it's really important to touch on the importance of old vines. If we lose these old vineyards, we no longer have that history and that diversity of clonal selection to pull from when we need to replant vineyards. How do these vineyards who have been raised in this environment for 100 years, how have they taken on their own shape and their own style that is very much a clonal representation of this place, not necessarily the place where they came from. So they really do live and respond to the region that they've been raised in for 100 years. And then we have that ability to have those clonal conversations of the importance of vine age and diversifying our vineyard landscape for more sustainable practices and vines that require less water as we move into a changing climate.
Wineries that you're tasting today, they're all recipients of the California Green Medal program. This is an awards program that's been around for 11 years. It was launched as a collaboration with all of the sustainability certification options around California. So Lodi Rules, Napa Green, the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, SIP certified in the Central Coast. All of these certifications came together and said, we've got to recognize the hard work and the leadership here. So every year, 4 wineries are recognized, and there's a rigorous application process, and each of the wineries that you're tasting today is a green medal recipient, which I think is a great platform if you're ever wondering who your go-to sustainable producers are. You can always just look at the green medal winners.
Yeah. And this is from Mendocino County, so moving east, but more high elevation as well, but again, a warmer climate, Cabernet Sauvignon focused. The McNab Ranch was originally a sheep station, and it's funny that they've come full circle and still have now sheep returning to the vineyards for this vineyard as well. It's one of their oldest vineyard sites, and again, so thinking about that old vine Cabernet conversation and how Cabernet from old vines differs from Mendocino County to Alexander Valley to Napa County. It's a conversation that continues to evolve, and with vinage and with sustainable practices where you're seeing the true conversation between the soil and the vine and the climate, it gives so much more meaning to these defined AVAs going forward. And I love the resolved tannins on this wine, and I know, speaking to Bonterra, who are right there, they also have much lower yields coming from this vineyard site as well. Again, because of that very natural balance that the vines put in place themselves, working and not having to refine so much being in the vineyard to drop buds and to leaf pull and to drop clusters. The vine will moderate itself in accordance with the vintage at hand.
I also do want to note Bonterra is another vineyard that has recently started their journey towards regenerative certification. You heard that as a theme throughout, that many of the wines that we tasted today are all working towards that certification. That is, we still call it the new kid on the block in the tapestry of certifications. And so, I think that term really is resonating a lot with consumers and trade. And that is an important aspect of the work that we're doing. We want to be sure that we are, producing what our consumers want. I don't think that's really what drives these growers and vintners. I don't think it's the ability to put a label on the bottle. I think that what drives them is because they know it's the right thing to do. And this is a generational business, and they want to make sure that they have thriving businesses to hand over to the next generation.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because we are so close with our vineyard stewards, with the generations that are coming after us. There is a real conscious conversation about what we're doing now and how that remains, that memory that remains in the soil and in the vines, and how we continue that conversation. And so the importance of having safe sprays if we're spraying, how sheltered are our vineyard stewards, how protected is everyone who works and lives on that property, how protected are the spawning species and the biodiversity that lives on the property. Everything that we do above the land, either on the leaves or on the soil, flows down into the water table and down the slopes and into our rivers and impacts the wildlife and biodiversity around us. There are several organizations as well who are now protecting wildlife habitat, and a lot of the vineyards that I speak to are really working to protect those habitats for wildlife, understanding that wild yeasts live in those habitats as well, and that's what makes a better, truer expression and authentic expression of the wine in the glass and a living wine.